Palatov Motorsport was founded on a lust for speed. Dennis had owned dozens of track cars and bikes, from Exiges to Atoms, BMW M cars, and Ducatis. But his pursuit of performance led him where it leads many men with big dreams, to building his own version of a perfect track car. A little bit after my first video went live on Palatov Motorsport last year, I got an email from Dennis asking me if I was interested in doing a continuing series on both his cars and the high-performance driving skills that you would need to drive them. Now, this opportunity was a rare chance to receive driving training from professionals and go for rides in some of Palatov Motorsport's incredible inventions. And if I played my cards right, maybe get to drive one myself. As you can imagine, I jumped at the opportunity. I kept in touch and finally found a weekend to head out to ORP again. So, I have all my shit in my Evo, and I am on my way. It's a pretty cool opportunity, though, because I think that I'm going to get a chance to at least go for a ride in the D2, and hopefully get a chance to drive my Evo on track. My Evo, for the record, was fairly new to me, and had recently undergone about $7,000 in upgrades. I should note, however, that in discussing high-performance driving with Dennis, he emphasized that parts and horsepower isn't nearly as important as technique and training. But I always thought a little extra power would never hurt anybody. Now, for those of you that have never been to ORP, it sits next to a small burg in a barren sea of totally unoccupied farmland. Rolling into ORP, I felt my nerves begin to start up. One of Dennis's customers and a D1 owner and driver, Neil, had agreed to take some of Dennis's guests for a ride in the D2 RS, but only after he spent some time in his Hartley-powered D1. Now, if you've seen my other video on Palatov Motorsport, you understand what a force of nature the D1 is to behold in person. If you're just tuning in, suffice to say, it's a 430 horsepower car that weighs 1,100 pounds. After Neil completed his initial laps, he was kind enough to take the few guests out in the D2 RS. Now, the D2 is Palatov Motorsport's largest model, and is a two-seater unlike the D1 or D4, where the engine sits in what would be the passenger seat. The D2 RS is packing a GM supercharged LSA V8. It does outweigh the other cars by a fair margin, but at 1,900 pounds you could barely call it heavy. As I got in for my turn, I was reminded why diet and exercise is so important if you want to fit into race cars. I'm not exactly fat, but no one could accuse me of being skinny, which is why getting the racing harness of the D2 properly buckled between my legs required 3 separate attempts and Neil's assistance. I remembered thinking, maybe all the harnessing was excessive. But as Neil settled in next to me and the car started, I began to think that the harness's vice-like grip on my groin could be preferable to the alternative. Before we shoved off, he yelled over the engine noise that I needed to look through the corners to keep from getting sick, and to signal him if I felt like I was going to throw up. With that, we ripped off into a warm-up lap. Under hard acceleration and braking, I began to realize how much this car was going to make me work, simply as a passenger. . 'Cause 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 ' pace, the car was hilariously fast. The ride was rock solid with no perceivable body roll at all, yet I could feel the car yaw gently as Neil cornered. With a license plate, I had never felt anything like this before. Its ability to slice through a corner and come ripping into triple digits on the exit made even the most aggressive street cars I'd been in seem somewhat gentle or half-hearted. Lap 2, Neil really started to give it the beans a bit. But in discussion, he later confided that the car never really went past about 70% of what he could do with it. But even at 70%, it was giving me a hell of an adrenaline rush. I hadn't felt anything like this since I'd been on a motorcycle. Positive displacement superchargers provide a nice, instantaneous rush of torque, and when coupled to a 6.2-liter V8, it is tabletop flat and comes on hard in any gear with zero delay. The D2's unbelievably Spartan design makes for a power-to-weight ratio that is nothing short of amazing. If I were to try to modify my Evo to match the D2 RS, it would have to put out about 1,200 wheel horsepower. And even gutting a modern sport compact, you could barely expect to hit the 2,500 pound mark. The lightest Evo 10 I've ever seen, for comparison, was about 3,100 pounds. Climbing a hill at 130 miles per hour, cresting it, and entering a massive right-hand bowl corner could easily turn the stomach of some. But I remember laughing in my helmet and quietly cursing, and just knowing that my freshly upgraded Evo was going to feel entirely too pedestrian after this ride. As if the D2 and the D2 RS weren't enough, Palatov Motorsport is creating a twin-turbo LS setup in 2017, and hopefully I'll be able to go for a ride in that soon too. While we rode around, I remembered when I first began talking with Dennis about doing episodes focused on high-performance driving skills. I asked him what car control techniques he thought you would need to properly react to a road course. His response was to clarify that you have to anticipate instead of react. Now, I'd felt glimpses of this before on motorcycles and in cars, but I just never heard it put so undeniably and so simply. Noting, I had tried recording my commentary with an in-helmet mic, but over the roar of the engine and 100-mile-per-hour wind gusts, it sounded more like I was yelling into a vacuum cleaner. The D2 D2 RS is one of those cars you see and immediately want to drive, but going for a few laps had given me a solemn respect for the level of control and planning that Neil was exercising to drive it. Cars like this are humbling and not for the uninitiated, which might help explain why almost every customer or driver of Palatov's cars I've ever met seems to be either a driving instructor or a professional racer. But don't let that scare you off. It's not like these skills are unlearnable. I had expressed my concern about that to Dennis once before, and he reassured me that with proper training, anybody could drive these cars. Although driving them fast is an entirely different story. I thanked Neil and stumbled out of the harness and over to my Evo. Like I said, I just recently got it back from tuning after putting in loads of work and money. And today I was not only relearning the car, taking it on the track for the first time, but also receiving instruction from a known and respected professional, Dennis Palatov himself. In addition, I was going to be sharing the track with Neil and his D1. Needless to say, there was plenty to be excited about, but without a doubt, I was nervous. Hey guys, if you liked what you saw, please remember to hit that like button, share, or subscribe, and as always, stay tuned for more.